The war is over, but the suffering continues for the Tamil civilians displaced by the conflict. 6 weeks on and they're living in what the Sri Lankan government calls welfare camps, but what critics claim are little short of the world's biggest open-air prisons. It's almost impossible for journalists to get into the camps except for strictly controlled government tours, such as that for the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. But these visits don't show the reality of life in the camps. Having compiled a dossier of material and having spoken to aid workers and displaced Tamil refugees, Al Jazeera is now able to reveal what it's like to live in Sri Lanka's IDP camps. The people we spoke to did not want to be identified, but what they told us was both shocking and disturbing. Back in May, even before the fighting was over, aid agencies were sounding the alarm about the camps, telling Neil Boona, the United Nations resident humanitarian coordinator, in a letter,
"Current conditions at Manic Farm are not only in violation of IDP's fundamental human rights to freedom of movement, education and livelihoods, they're also failing to adequately fulfil rights on basic access to food, water and shelter."
It continued,
"Shelters are currently inhabited by an average of 2 to 3 families per shelter, creating conditions which heighten the risk of domestic abuse, gender-based violence and the spread of communicable diseases and social fragmentation."
Manic Farm near the town of Vavunia is one of the biggest IDP camps, consisting of a total of 6 zones. If they met accepted international norms known as sphere standards, 145,000 people could be housed here. Instead, there are more than 220,000. Zone 2 is the most overcrowded, with numbers almost double the recommended sphere standard. Food, water and sanitation standards are well below what they should be. There have already been protests in some of the camps.
We are now in refugee centers and there is no proper water, food or sanitation for us. For the past 3 days, we have not taken a bath. We are only getting 1 meal a day in the night. We have been living in dirt and there is a bad odor in the air everywhere.
The conditions are very, very poor. The shelters are inadequate. The water and sanitation infrastructure is very inadequate. They're extremely overcrowded.
Other UNHCR internal reports highlight serious restrictions on IDP's freedom of movement and the presence of armed military personnel inside certain camps. Also noting that screening of IDPs at 2 camps in Mannar had taken more than a year and restrictions on movement were still in place.
IDPs are detained within the camps, so they're surrounded by razor wire and guarded by the military, and no one's allowed freedom of movement, so yes, they go, I would call them prison camps.
Health is a big concern. Within the camps there are just 4 functioning hospitals and 6 primary health centres, and now there are growing concerns about child malnutrition and disease. A study in March found 44% of children under 5 were either moderately or severely wasted, underweight or had stunted growth. There have been outbreaks of diseases such as hepatitis A, chickenpox and skin ailments, and there are fears that cholera may develop. Assurances have been given by the Sri Lankan government that 80% of the civilians will be able to return to their homes within 180 days, but critics feel this is an unrealistic pledge. The overcrowding has led to increasing allegations of sexual and physical abuse, which are impossible to prove conclusively without an independent investigation, something the government of Sri Lanka is refusing.
There is some cases of abuse from the army. Some of the cases that have been verified have been girls and women who've become pregnant because of incidents in the valley. There's also harassment and inappropriate behaviour amongst the IDPs as well. I think some of because of the frustration and the containment, some of those incidents are also growing, but I think the more serious incidences have tended to be from the army.
The government refutes all allegations made against it. It maintains that it has liberated the Tamil civilians from the tyranny of the LTTE and claims the accusations are part of a propaganda campaign.
At one time it was murder, other times it was killings. Now it has come to the extent of rape and other sexual abuses. These are all made up, and in the event any such abuse is there, we have had the most disciplined administration in taking care of the IDPs all this time. Why is it surfacing now? And why is it being planted like this? Because they want to discredit every effort of the government of Sri Lanka.
One of the most serious allegations against the Sri Lankan government is that they continually shelled and bombed so-called safe zones in the later stages of the war. Those denials don't convince everyone, especially those who endured it.
The shelling was so heavy, we couldn't even bathe or relieve ourselves. We had difficulty running and moving around. There were dead bodies everywhere. The people died in buses, bunkers and open spaces as they were hit by bombs landing in areas wherever they were. We also saw people being shot at close range by Sri Lankan army.
Once more, this is almost impossible to verify. The Sri Lankan government is refusing to allow neutral observers to examine the combat zone, which gives ammunition to those who claim a clean-up operation is being carried out to hide evidence.
They were using these shells, these heavy weapons, and they were using them in an area where a very heavy civilian population was concentrated. And clearly there were civilian deaths as a result of that. There were also eyewitness accounts that the LTTE was shooting at people, shooting using small weapons, I think, basically when people were trying to flee. Now, how do you strike a balance with that? We may never know unless there's a kind of inquiry we have asked for, an independent inquiry into this.
The government promises the displaced will be home this year. It promises peace and reconciliation, a fair political process and a life for the Tamils free from tyranny. But what if it doesn't fulfil the promises? Who will ensure accountability? Governments and aid organisations have remained silent for a variety of reasons. The people living in the squalid camps of Sri Lanka have paid a price for that silence.